everybody. So today we are going to be talking some more about the Uranus return in the United States, or the United States Uranus return. This is part two. Part one, if you didn't catch it, I do recommend watching it because I'm not going to go over everything like I did in part one. Part one had a lot of stuff in it that part two won't have. So I do recommend watching it to catch yourself up to speed. I will put the link in the description box below where you can watch part one if you haven't already. Also, I wanted to mention I've done a lot of writing. Recently. I felt very righty, very righty. So if you're more of a reader than a watcher and you'd like to read instead of watch this, or you want to read along as you're watching this or whatever, listening or whatever the case might be, I will put the link in the description box where you can read the article that I wrote on the United States Uranus return. I will also put the link in the description box where I wrote on my blog about transit Uranus in Gemini, because I do think both of these are worth checking out. Also, I wanted to mention, because I've gotten some questions and comments in the comments for different videos about where you can find me for a reading. You can find me at saturnseason.com under the menu of services tab or services tab on the website. If you are interested in having me read for you, I do a whole bunch of different readings, natal chart readings, transits, solar arc, secondary progressions, synastry and composite charts, which is relational astrology, relationship astrology, solar returns, annual perfections, past life stuff. I love doing that kind of stuff. Galactic center, galactic grand cross readings, all kinds of readings. I do all kinds of stuff. I even do tarot readings. So if you are interested in any of that, I also give private astrology lessons. I love to teach. If you are interested in any of that, or were wondering where you can find me, I will put the link in the description box to my menu of services. So if anybody is interested, that's where you can find me for that. Okay, so now that I've gotten that out of the way, part two, this is going to be part two of transit Uranus, transit Uranus in Gemini and the United States Uranus return, when transit Uranus will be in Gemini. Okay, I'm going to be looking at the blog post because the dates that I do want to, that's what I'm doing over here. The dates that I did want to mention are when the United States Uranus return takes place. I do think that should be reset in this video. That will be going on from July 5th of 2026 through May 28th of 2029. With and I'm looking at a 5-degree orb of applying and separating from transit Uranus to natal Uranus in the US's chart. The US has its natal Uranus at 8 degrees 55 minutes of Gemini. So I'm looking at 3 degrees 55 minutes transit Uranus in Gemini at 3 degrees 55 minutes to 13 degrees 55 minutes of Gemini. That's what I'm counting as the Uranus return in the United States. Transit Uranus will be exactly conjunct the US's natal Uranus on July 26th of 2027, November 5th of 2027, and May 11th of 2028. So 2027, 2028 it doesn't mean that's going to be heightened Uranus return energy, if you will. And this has been on my mind for a while, this particular thing. You know, we just had Pluto's return in the US. We just had it. Well, really, it's still going on. It's at the very tail end. It's at the very tail end of it, but this has been on most people's radar. Anybody in the astrology world, this particular thing has been on people's radar for a while. Pluto's return in the US, even people that aren't in the US, because the US is so involved in the world, on the world stage. People have been focused on Pluto's return. Now, I've been focused on Pluto's return too. It's not like I haven't been focused on it, but the first time I ever did a video about the United States Uranus return was in the fall of 2021. And that was just the first time I ever did a video about it or talked about it. That it had been on my radar even before then. Because as big of a deal as I thought Pluto's return would be in the US, I always felt like Uranus's return would be a bigger deal, perhaps a bigger problem, a bigger issue, more challenging. And I still hold that opinion today on July 21st of 2024. My opinion on that has not changed. And that's because from a historical lens, every time the United States has had a Uranus return, we have been at war. And by war here, I don't mean like by proxy wars, like where we'd really like to be fighting somebody else, but instead we're fighting, we're not fighting, you know what I mean? So I'm not talking about proxy wars. I'm not talking about wars where we're helping an ally or something like that. I'm talking about direct conflict wars, usually because we have been directly hit in some way. So the wars I'm thinking, we've only had 2 Uranus returns before. One was during the American Civil War, which there was a direct hit on on American citizens from American citizens with us doing that to ourselves. And then there was the other one, the second one was during World War II, when we were directly hit. Pearl Harbor was directly hit, got us into World War II. So that's more the sort of wars that I'm talking about here. Because, and I make that distinction because somebody in the video that I first did about this in 2021 did make the comment, when is the US not at war? Good fucking point. Really good point. And I should have made that more clear in that video, that I'm talking about wars, not by proxy wars. I'm not talking about wars where we're just helping allies or whatever. I'm talking about direct impact wars where we have been directly hit in some way. So, looking from a historical lens, there's that going on. And also from that same historical lens, the Civil War and World War II, there was some transit Pluto fuckery to the US's natal Pluto right before these past 2 Uranus returns. And that is the case this time. Transit Pluto, we had Pluto's return. And then right after that, we'll have Uranus's return. Uranus will move into Gemini, and we will have the United States Uranus return. So there is a historical thing here. There are cycles. Things are cyclical. So in looking at that, there is a part of like, yeah, this is concerning. I don't want to be scary or fear-mongery or anything like that. I should have started this out with that disclaimer. That's not the point of this. But there are cycles here that should be noticed, should be looked at, and should, people should be prepared. I don't think people should sit around worried or being anxious about it or nervous about it. That does fuck all. It's a waste of time to sit around being nervous and anxious and worrying about stuff. That is a waste of your energy. But being prepared, knowledge is power. Being prepared, that's a good thing. That's a good use of your energy. So just, being prepared for the energies that are coming up around the corner, things that could be coming up. There is a power in that. And that's what I'm hoping to give you all today as you watch this. Not fear or or anxiety. That is not my jam. That is not what I'm trying to do to y'all. I just want to throw that out there. Okay. So what is a Uranus return? Uranus returns happen every 84 years. And essentially what happens is transit Uranus will come back to the exact same location as Uranus in the natal chart. This is the same thing for all planetary return charts. They don't always take 84 years for a return to happen. Like we have solar returns every year. And that is essentially when the sun moves back to the same sign in the same degree, minutes, and seconds that it is in your natal chart. Happens once a year. And then you look at the chart for when that happens, and that's your solar return chart. I mentioned it earlier. I think I mentioned it. I mentioned the menu, the services that I offer, because I do solar return work. Well, all planetary returns, function that way. It's when the planet comes back to its same sign in the same degree, minute, second as it is in the natal chart. And that's what a Uranus return is. It's when Uranus comes back to the same degree, minute, second, and the same sign that it is in the natal chart. And this happens roughly every 84 years. Saturn returns are roughly every 29 years. I'm sure y'all have heard of that, that kind of thing. And essentially what happens during a Uranus return is, just quickly, there's usually change that happens, usually because Uranus is shocking change. There usually is change that happens, but Uranian themes in general come to the forefront. And not everybody's going to have a Uranus return. Not everybody will live to be around 84 years old, so not everybody will have a Uranus return. Not every country will have a Uranus return. Depends on how long that country is alive, right? Or how long it's been alive in its current state or whatever. But we have had, this will be our third one. and Uranian themes come up, and specifically Uranian themes from the natal chart, like what Uranus wants to express in the natal chart. Those themes, we come face to face with them and have to deal with them. If there are things that need to be dealt with in this regard, they have to be dealt with. Okay, I'm going to share the screen so I can share the chart. Let me get my pictures. Okay. So this is the US's natal chart on the inside. These are transits on the outside. I have it set for July 26th of 2027. That was the first pass, the first exact pass. As you'll see, transit Uranus is here, conjunct the US's natal Uranus for the first time. So that's why I have it set like that. But transit Uranus in the US's natal chart is in the 6th house, which is the house that deals with daily life, the mundane, routines, the work that one does, work environment, daily living, health, physical health and mental health, I think can be found here. Unequal relationships are a 6th house thing. Service, being of service, helpfulness, all of those sorts of things. The 6th house has an affinity for Virgo energy. So yeah, not the ruler of Virgo, but not the ruler of the 6th house, but there is an affinity between the 6th house and Virgo energy. So we have Uranus in the 6th house of the US's chart in Gemini. But even more interestingly than it being in the 6th house, it's actually conjunct the descendant. And the descendant is the part of the chart. Not only is it what we attract into our lives, whether we like it or not. And sometimes we don't like what we attract through the descendant. Sometimes we don't, but it is what we attract into our lives. It's also, though, the ascendant is where the chart rises. That's why they call the ascendant the rising. Now, go all the way over. The descendant is where the chart sets, like when the sun sets in the sky. And when the sun's setting in the sky, there are shadows on the ground, literal shadows. So the descendant is a shadowy place for that reason. Now, when I say shadow, I mean like we know those shadows exist, right? We're walking around, sun's going down. We know our shadows on the ground, but do we really give a shit? No. Most people don't. Is their shadow going to scare them? No. not most of the time anyway. So they know the shadow is there. They know their shadow is there, but they don't really give a shit, or they don't pay attention to it, or they ignore it, or they dismiss it, or they forget about it, or whatever. For some, the descendant might be qualities that they don't even realize that they have or don't have. You can also play it like that. So Uranus in the United States' chart is very much a part of that shadow. Now, where I left off yesterday, is that, let me get to it. I'm looking at my blog post so I can make. Okay, so where I left off yesterday, I don't think we see how much chaos, trauma, and fragmentation our own media and communication causes this country. When I say media, I'm talking about all forms of media. I'm talking about social media. I'm talking about other kinds of media. I'm talking about news media. I'm talking about all kinds of media and communication and communications. That's very Gemini. Uranus planet is a planet, so it's a what wants to be expressed. We're talking chaos, trauma, fragmentation, all of those things. So I do think there is a thing going on here where we don't always pay attention as a country how big of an issue that is, how our media might, and again, not just news media, but social media, other forms of media, we might not realize how this can keep us fragmented off from one another, detached from one another. It can cause chaos and trauma, and it does. Because the most polarizing kinds of things out there, media-wise, are what get the most attention. That's what sells. And that in and of itself is a whole other conversation and a problem. And I would also bet that this is not just a problem in the US, right? This kind of communication and and media and things like that being being something that fragments people off, creates chaos, all of this. I don't think that this is strictly just a US problem, but I do think that during the US's Uranus return, it is something we'll have to deal with. I think it is, because it's, these past even longer than 10 years, but definitely 10 years have been so polarizing. Like we are so divided as a country. We are so polarized. And I do think that media and the way that we consume media in this country is a big piece of it. I think if they were less polarizing, whether that be social media, news media, other forms of media, I think if they were less polarizing and less us versus them, which is a thing here, and I'll get to that in just a second. But I think if they were less that way, if they communicated less that way across the board, I think it would help us to not be so polarized as a country. But I don't think that we always see the problem with this or see the issue with this because of the descendant, because of Uranus being conjunct the descendant. I also don't think that we are always the way that we communicate within our country too, just with one another. I think we don't realize how chaotic that is, how traumatic that is, or how traumatizing that is. I think that there are things along these lines that are going to have to be addressed during Uranus's return that you're already seeing, we've been seeing for a while now, but I think they will come up even more so once transit Uranus moves into Gemini, and definitely once the United States Uranus return happens. Another thing, and I mentioned this in the transit Uranus in Gemini video, just that one, but mental health. I do think that, we've both of these are intelligent. Uranus, intelligent. Very heady. So is Gemini. This Uranian intelligence, so, is more like genius or flashes of genius, whereas Gemini is more basic intelligence. But both very mental, very, very heady. And this is in the 6th house of health, mental and physical health. I do think the 6th house is both. And I do think that when we have our Uranian return, we will have to deal with things regarding mental health. I think we will be faced with things. We already are. And I don't need to go through them all here because I think everybody, there are a lot of things that that I could bring up here in terms of the US and mental health. But I do think that these things will come up when the United States Uranus return happens. I think they will come up even more. Hopefully we deal with them. We don't keep ignoring them. I think we probably won't be able to for some reason, because again, when Uranus comes home, we are forced to deal with things. You're forced to deal with Uranian things. And I do think that this Uranian return, while I don't think that it's necessarily easy in this regard, I think if it forces us to deal with our mental health crisis, which is a crisis in this country, I would extend that out to the world probably, because I know that the US isn't the only place having this, but I do think the US does a piss poor job of dealing with it. And within this country, we do. we do. We don't do a good job of that. And of dealing with that. And I think the Uranus return here could force us to have to do something about that in some way, which if that happens, that's a good thing, because like I said, we've done a piss poor job of that so far. We can do better. We can do better. Another thing I wanted to mention is the hive mind. The hive being Uranus, Gemini being the mind, right? The hive mind is a problem. Hive mind is a problem. I talked about this a little bit in the in the Uranus in Gemini video. It's something that I don't think that we always see in this country as being a problem, because Uranus is conjunct the descendant, but it's a problem. It's a problem. I feel like we have we have got, there's not, first of all, there's nothing wrong with aligning with a group or with a community, with humanity, with a certain with certain pockets of it. There's nothing wrong with that, you know. But I do think that what has happened, and Uranus, I mentioned this in that video, Uranus and Aquarius, and I'm not ragging on them. I love Aquarius energy. I love Uranus. I feel like I'm pretty Uranian in a lot of ways myself. But Uranus energy and Aquarius can both be at the highest vibration. They are very like inclusive of everybody. Come as you are, whatever, come where you are, come how you are, and everybody is invited, included. At a lower vibration, this energy pockets off and stays pocketed off. And it's very us versus them, black and white. My team is right. My side is right. Your side is wrong. So, and that in this country is how that energy is manifesting. And that is how it's manifesting. And that's not a 21st century thing either. So, but I do think that Uranian returns can force us to see that. And I think what's going to happen, I think what's probably going to have to happen here, probably enough people are going to have to be alienated in some way, from the group, from their pockets of group or group pockets, to be able to individuate. Because really how I'd like to see this go is liberation of thought, liberation of the mind. And I think sometimes what can happen, especially in this country, I'm sure it can happen other places too, but especially in this country, is people tend to stick with their echo chambers, their sides, whatever that is. I mean, right now we have in the US, we have the 2024 presidential election. So I'm thinking, politics stuff, but really we can talk about anything. People tend to stick with people that will agree with them, that will side with them. And that's not well, there's nothing wrong with that. I also want there's nothing wrong with aligning yourself with people that you think the same way you do. That doesn't mean that people that don't think the way you do are bad or the enemy or wrong. They just think differently than you do. It's a perception thing. So I think, one of the beneficial ways that this could go would be to liberate the mind, liberate communication, liberate thought, different forms of communication, right? Talking to people that are different than you. Getting the perspective of people that are different than you. That is desperately needed in this country, because you can entertain an idea, you can listen to somebody, hear what somebody has to say, and not actually agree with them. We can still agree to disagree and still be respectful about it. And we can entertain, we can hear people out and not have to agree with them, but hear them out. And that is something that is desperately needed in this country. Now, in the blog post, and I will say this here, if I get any comments along the lines of, no, I won't do that, the other group side don't listen to me, they are the problem, then I hate to break it to you, but you're part of the fucking problem too, and I mean that. Zoom thinks I'm right. Just kidding. The thumbs up thing. No, but seriously, if you are of the mindset, and that might sound really harsh, but if you are of the mindset that you won't do it anymore because, the other side doesn't listen to you or whatever, you really are part of the problem. You really are. Because ain't shit gonna get fixed or change if we don't start talking to each other and start talking to each other like people. Like people. Quit seeing, and as individuals, and quit seeing what side each person plays for or whatever. Like, that has got to stop. Like, it's got to stop here. I feel like it's probably needs to stop all over the world, but it definitely needs to stop here. For sure. Nothing will ever change if it doesn't. I cannot stress this enough for my fellow country people. Let's get our shit together. We really, really need to. Like, I can't, I just, like, we need to. Okay, so, with that being said, all of that being said, in previous Uranus returns, you know, there was change to daily life, right? This was something that came up, change to daily life. Makes sense because we've got, change, Uranus, in the sixth house daily life. And in Gemini, right? The Gemini energy is also like neighborhoods, regions, areas that are local to us. There was change in all of this, right? Like in during World War II, when the second Uranus return was going on, the men went off to war and women entered the workforce. That was a change in daily life and even professional sports. So that was a change in daily life. There were other things too, but that's just an example. In the during the Civil War, we had, changes to the actual country, right? Changes to areas that are local, regional to us. Neighboring states, a state that was your neighbor might have broken off and joined the Confederacy, right? So there were changes to daily life, major changes to daily life in the areas that were local during each Uranian return. I do think we will see some of that here. Exactly how that manifests, I don't know, but I do think that we will see change to daily life. We will see change to things like that. I've been thinking for a while what this might end up looking like is some kind of movement of people to different parts of the country. We're already kind of seeing this. I mean, like, for instance, like there have been a shitload of people moving here to Texas. But other parts of the country too, there's been like a migration of sorts. And I think we'll see more of that kind of stuff too, as Uranus moves into Gemini and as Uranus's return takes place. I think there could be some of that. Oh shit. My notes, like, okay. Okay, so there's that. Another thing that I wanted to address here, this is kind of a historical thing. The notion of depressions and recessions happening like while Uranus is in Taurus, and then something with our currency changing once Uranus moves into Gemini. Like for instance, and us coming out of those recessions, depressions, once Uranus is in Gemini. Now, okay, in the 1850s, when transit Uranus was in Taurus, there was the Panic of 1857. This also took place when transit Pluto was square the US's natal Pluto. And it makes sense for money, resource stuff to happen with a difficult Pluto transit like that, because the US's Pluto is in the second house of resources and money and that kind of stuff. But the Panic of 1857 happened. And what happened, 5,000 US businesses failed. It was a big deal. It was actually one of the catalysts for the Civil War. It's a catalyst that doesn't seem to get talked about very often, but it was one of the catalysts for the American Civil War that started up in 1861. So there was that, right? Then in the 1930s, there was the recession of 1937, 1938. Now, this recession was actually really, really bad, but it gets eclipsed by the Great Depression that happened from 29 to 33. If the Great Depression hadn't happened, damn, that's a big spider. If the Great Depression hadn't happened, then the recession of 1837, 1838 would, I think, get talked about a lot more than it does, because it was really bad. And it happened a few years before we entered World War II. So here we are again in the same sort of thing. We had the recession during the COVID era in 2020 for a few months, or that's what they say anyway. For a few months in 2020, when Uranus was in Taurus. It's still in Taurus right now as I'm filming this, but Uranus in Taurus. Some transit Pluto fuckery about to start. And then a few years later, we will enter transit Uranus in Gemini. So that is, that is interesting. There is like a historical thing going on, right, with the recession, and then precession when Uranus is in Taurus. And then once Uranus is in Gemini and we have our Uranian return, money gets better for the US because wars, let's also say this, wars are big business. Wars are money makers. You're having financial problems and you go to war, it's probably going to help pull you out of it. That just, is what it is. Now, as far as currency goes, there were changes to currency during these periods of time. During during the Civil War in the 1860s, one of the changes to the currency, to our currency, was the issuing of greenbacks. Before that, and this was paper money that wasn't backed by gold and silver, and it wasn't so paper money before that was issued by private banks. The American Civil War kind of changed that because we started issuing these things called greenbacks. So that was a change to the currency. Before that, we were just using like gold and silver coins, that kind of thing. So that was a change to the currency, right? The other thing, in the 1940s, during I'm making sure that I'm getting my dates right, so I'm looking over at my blog post. In the 1940s, the Bretton Woods Agreement during World War II took place. And this essentially, and I'm going to read from my blog post so I can say it concisely. It was a system that was in place. It's not in place anymore, but it was in place. That essentially the currency of all Western countries at the time were valued in alignment with the US dollar. The IMF, or International Monetary Fund, was created from this. That is still in existence. But the Bretton Woods Agreement, that went away in the 1970s when we went off the gold standard. Or the early 1970s, mid 1970s, whatever it was. Oh, okay, I must be right because Zoom is giving me a phantom thumbs up. Okay. So these that particular one that deals with the world or Western countries, that's more of a world thing, which makes sense because that was about, World War II, right? The thing about greenbacks in the Civil War, makes sense. And I'm thinking about this. And like I mentioned in the other video, I do feel like there are themes from both the Civil War and World War II that will come back around while Uranus's return happens this time. I do think we will see themes of both. Now, I don't think that it's going to look like what we think war looks like. I really don't. I don't think it's going to look the same as what we might envision in our heads. Like as far as like the Civil War goes and we envision that, I think it'll look a little different. Same thing with any kind of World War II or, World War III kind of thing. Really, I feel like it's going to be more like pockets of conflicts sprouting up. We're already kind of seeing this. I don't think I guess my point is, I don't think it's going to look exactly like what we think it might look like. Now there are higher vibrational ways. Oh, actually, wait. There's also, I do think there were a lot of technological advancements too during the previous two Uranus returns. The first one in the 1860s, there was, for instance, the Transcontinental Railroad here in the US was built. That's a big technology, a big technological advancement, right? Uranus is technology. And during World War II, there was the invention of the atom bomb. I don't know if that was really progress, but that was an advancement. So I do think that we will probably see technological advancements here in this country as well during Uranus's return, or advancements, kind of like how we might feel about the A-bomb. but I think there probably will be stuff. My first thought does go to AI, or artificial intelligence, though I think there's probably more that's going to be going on than just artificial intelligence, just like there was more that was going on in terms of technological advancements during the first two Uranus returns. Those are just examples. So I think there probably will be more going on than that, but artificial intelligence is where my mind goes to first, especially with transit, you know, or not transit, especially with Uranus, right? Being like technology and progress and the future and all of these things. And Gemini being like intelligent, the mind, all of that. It does seem, but I think what we might have to deal with how to use it, because I'm not sure that because it is something that, while I think it's got a lot of propensity to be used for good, I think a lot of it's cool as shit. Like, I do think it's cool, but I think it can also be a very dangerous thing for us to use in a lot of ways. We've got to know what we're doing, and we've got to use it in a way that isn't for the bad or for the negative, you know, kind of like the internet. It's very similar to the internet in that way. And other things. A lot of things are that way. You know, they can be used for the good or used for the bad. It just kind of, or easy or challenging, whatever. A lot of things are that way. But yeah. So there are higher vibrational ways that we can use this energy in the US, that we can work this energy. I do think that, like I mentioned before with the hive mind thing, I do think revolution and freedom of the mind, communication and sharing is a thing. I think we need to focus on that. Again, it doesn't mean that we can't align with our groups or feel aligned with groups or whatever. I'm not saying that at all. But we do need to be able to think independently from them. We do need to be able to, I think that's important. that we don't strictly stick with just groupthink and that's it. That's a problem. That is a problem here in this country. That's a problem everywhere, but it's definitely a problem here in this country, and we need to watch for that. I think it's important that we watch for that. Really, we need to be trying to liberate and revolution and freedom of our mind, of our thinking, of our sharing, of our communication, of all of these things. And again, I think I have here in my blog post, I think the hive mind probably has to get worse before the above can happen. Enough people have to be like, enough is enough, and break away from this notion of the hive mind. And this has to be done in a non-polarizing way, or enough have to be alienated by the hive mind themselves. And I think if enough people are alienated, then that kind of breaks the hive mind apart and forces that liberation. And that could very well be how this goes. Rebellion and liberation from manipulation and lies. Gemini energy can be rather manipulative and con man-like at times. I do think that and I mentioned this in the other videos, I think a little bit, but just, I have here, Uranus is the great liberator, one of the highest vibrational ways that this energy can come about, which makes me think that we can do this in the United States and really across the world. We just have to be willing to question things differently than we have before and use our own intelligence individually to do so. That's a big piece of this as well. Now, another way I'd like to see this go, I won't go too much into this here, is trauma and fragmentation of the two-party system here in the US. I'd love to see that fucking shit go away. I'm so tired of that. The left and the right shit. I'm so sick of it. I am so sick of it. I've had it up to here. Beyond that, I've had it. I have had it. You only get one option or the other. They both suck. They both suck. I could go off on that. I'll spare you. I would love to see that be completely fragmented off or done away with. Rather than voting for a fucking party, we vote for a person who has their own values, their own things they want to do for the country. I would love to see this happen. Not sure we're there yet, but I would love to see a fragmentation of the two-party system, fragmenting off into even more parties. Really, I'd love, again, I would love to get to a place where we don't even need any parties, where we don't feel the need for it, because it's really not necessary. But again, I don't think we're there yet, but I hope we get there. And I say that the two-party system, Gemini is the twins to Uranus being trauma and fragmentation. It seems like it's possible. I would like to see this happen. I think it probably gets worse, though, before it gets better. That is just a feeling that I have here. Now, thinking about the future. This is a big one. It's something that we should all start doing now. You need to be thinking about what you want the future to look like, not only for yourself or for ourselves, but for the generations that come after us. Like, I don't want to leave my son a fucking shit show, a mess. I don't want his generation growing up with a fucking mess. I know as a millennial, we feel like we inherited a mess. And you know, and I'm sure that other generations felt like they inherited a mess, whatever. I don't want that for my son and his generation. I do not want that for him. We have got to think about what we want our future to look like as a country, what we really want it to look like, and try to do that. Do we want to leave a chaotic mess? Or do we want to leave something better? I think we all need to ask ourselves that and try to leave something better. Anyway, it is starting to rain like hard, so I'm going to head off. But if you want to share any thoughts that you have about transit Uranus and Gemini, or, you know, the United States Uranus return, please leave them below. I'd love to hear from y'all. I love hearing from y'all. I love responding, reading y'all's comments and all that. Anyway, I'm going to head off, but I will see you all later.